Wednesday mornings at this time, we check in with our friends in the nation's capital. And by friends, I mean the Black Box Reporter, the only reporter owned and operated newsroom covering our nation's capital. Check it out for yourself at blacklocks.ca. It is well worth what you put down for a subscription there because they are covering Ottawa like nobody else. The managing editor at Blacklocks Reporter is Tom Korski, who joins us for these weekly conversations. Tom, a very good Wednesday morning.
Good morning, Mike.
Tom, I'm thinking about Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who seems to be of the mind that the feds are making a strategic miscalculation on the Chinese EV deal, because according to Doug Ford, there are 70 seats in the province of Ontario. What do you make of Premier Ford's commentary about this Chinese EV deal?
Well, it is, I think, a statement of fact that no prime minister before Carney has done what he did in Beijing last Friday when he announced what is essentially tariff-free, very low tariff, 6%, essentially tariff-free access to the Canadian auto market for Chinese battery electric vehicles. Their quota, 49,000 vehicles, doesn't sound like a lot, but we don't buy a lot of battery electric cars in Canada, period. The official figures have averaged 100,000, about 108,000 battery electrics sold in Canada a year for the last 5 years. And 2025 was a terrible year. That's why we go with the average. So he's granted the Chinese factories, these are state-subsidized factories, access to about half the electric battery market. Premier Ford points out, and this is documented, the reason they can sell a $35,000 car is not because the Chinese are like a master race of auto technology. They pay their workers $6 a day. Well, you're not going to build a car in Canada for $6 a day, which means you're never going to have a Chinese auto factory in Canada. People may wonder, by the way, Michael, if the Chinese are such wizards when it comes to automotive production, why are there not a bunch of Chinese cars on the road now? And the reason is tailpipe emissions. Whether that's an unfair trade practice or not, there we are. They cannot meet that technology on tailpipe emissions for gas or diesel-powered vehicles, not even close. And so they make underpriced, inexpensive, in this case, these battery electrics that are pretty much lawnmowers on the road, and then you can come in because you can bypass those Environment Canada standards. This is very far-reaching. I think it's so far-reaching, I'd be surprised if it ever happens, Mike.
You know, I've been wondering about that too, Tom. I mean, it's all nice to make the announcement and make it everybody think, okay, diversification of global markets, et cetera. But yeah, what does actually come to pass from all of this?
It's inexplicable. We understand the gain for instance, Atlantic seafood and prairie farm product producers because they were hit by retaliatory tariffs. But we don't have to guess why the cabinet imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese electrics in the first place. They said so. The Minister of Finance in the day, Ms. Freeland, said to auto workers in Vaughan, Ontario, we are going to go to the wall for you because you are up against unfair, predatory trade practices by Chinese state-subsidized auto companies that want to undercut the market. And you think, well, was there no one on the trip to Beijing with the Prime Minister who could have explained that? Well, there was. His foreign minister, Ms. Anand, is from Oakville. Well, did they move the Ford headquarters from Oakville? I'm pretty sure I drove by that building many a day. Ford Motors can explain to their MP, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, why they can't compete with, forgive my language, Chinese slave-made cars at $6 a day. You can't do it. And it's Mike, if they let those cars in, the electric car market collapses. You will have people who will buy one of those vehicles because it's the cheapest vehicle on the market, and now you are supporting jobs in, not Oakville, China.
Yeah, when you start connecting the dots, very well done, as always, from our friends at Blacklocks. Okay, we saw last week, Tom, that a court ruled the Fed's application of the Emergency Act was unreasonable in their attempt to clear the Freedom Convoy. But what if there's any Freedom Convoy appeal to the Supreme Court? Any concerns there?
there are concerns, and it's expressed by some lawyers. And by the way, I think you have to have a bit of jam to protest, because you're going up against the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice Wagner, and the courts don't tend to like that. Way back in 2022, this was not ancient history, and it was after several defendants in the Freedom Convoy were charged with mischief. The Chief Justice, for some reason, decided to give an interview to a Quebec newspaper, Le Devoir, and he had opinions about the defendants. Remember, they were already facing charges in Ontario Superior Court. What did he say? I quote him: "What we saw on Wellington Street, that's the main drag just outside the Supreme Court building leading to Parliament Hill, difference of about 2 blocks. What we saw on Wellington Street," he said, "was the beginning of anarchy, where certain people decided to take other citizens hostage, to take the law into their own hands." End of quote. How can he now hear any case by on appeal involving the Freedom Convoy protesters that he is described as hostage takers and anarchists? Mike, there was a phenomenon in Ottawa. I'm an Ottawa ratepayer. I have friends, neighbors. For the sake of the friendship, we will not discuss the Freedom Convoy. I find Ottawans are unhinged on the subject. It was not enough for the local aristocracy in this town to disapprove of the Freedom Convoy. They had to express it publicly. Chief Judge didn't say this walking down a hallway, wasn't overheard by a reporter in an elevator. He wanted everyone to know what he thought of those protesters, who have now been proven twice by lower courts to have been victimized by unconstitutional actions by the cabinet. Isn't that something? You wouldn't do that in county police court in my hometown. Imagine a G7 Chief Justice given a newspaper interview to trash talk some defendants who he had to know were going to wind up in his own court. It's unbelievable.
It honestly is. Okay, we know that among other things, those folks involved in the Freedom Convoy were opposed to vaccine mandates, but does Health Canada now acknowledge that COVID shots, Tom, caused hardship for some anyway?
They do indeed. They set up a $75 million compensation fund. The managers they hired, the consultants they hired, will not disclose updated statistics. But there have been thousands of claims. By the way, the compensation fund covers medical expenses and, in some cases, funeral expenses. There were incomplete figures in the day, but the Public Health Agency, admittedly, there were millions of people who received shots. They counted more than 10,000 what they called serious adverse reactions, including death. 442 deaths before they stopped counting. There were other strokes, heart attacks, facial paralysis, spontaneous abortions. Now the Public Health Agency is taking management of the compensation fund. There's been complaints of slow and inept treatment of claims. But they do say in a memo we have run across that there has been frustration and hardship caused for people who were harmed by taking Health Canada's advice. Mike, it was a far-reaching event, that whole pandemic lockdown era. Isn't it funny? All these years later, we're still dealing with the fallout.
Yeah, we certainly are. And we've been talking about it quite a bit based on that ruling last week on the Emergencies Act, et cetera. And I honestly thought, Tom, like I figured we'd be litigating this into the future. I wasn't so sure it would be as near a future. I feel like we just got out of it, but here we are now already coming to realize and coming to terms with, oh boy, there was a lot of overreach going on for a few years, wasn't there?
There absolutely was. And there was, you talk about the far-reaching effects. We saw some internal research just the other day by the Public Health Agency, and they identified, this is a rational response, by the way. These people are not, subterranean internet conspiracy theorists. Rational response by very many Canadians, as polled internally by the Government of Canada, who have a growing mistrust of federal institutions. They do not believe what they are told. It is not sufficient to say, I'm with the government, you do this. That's very corrosive, and it will last for a long, long time. The feds have been very slow to try to regain that trust, Mike.
Okay, one more just before I let you go, Tom, because I think even if we don't live in Alberta, all of us felt that terrible fire in Jasper and what it did to that beautiful town. But please, I mean, I read the stuff at blacklocks.ca. So but come on, the fire preparedness budget the year before that blaze in Jasper had been slashed.
They cut it 23%. You know,
Oh,
the feds blamed climate change when the town burned to the ground. It was over $1 billion in insurance claims. Jasper is a very small town. And they blamed climate change. I can give you the quotes from cabinet ministers who talked about, what the Minister of Emergency Preparedness said, sadly, the Jasper is a victim to climate change. I remind Canadians to look at what climate change can do. No, not so much climate change. What they did have was 500,000 acres of dead pine following a beetle infestation 7 years before. And century-old forest management techniques are to cut down dead trees or have controlled burns before you get a lightning strike that sets a wildfire that'll burn the town, which is exactly what happened in Jasper. It was bad forest management. Who identified this as a key contributing factor to the disaster? The Canadian Forest Service, brand new report.
sometimes I wish I read less, Tom, but I'm certainly grateful for what you help us understand at blacklocks.ca. Thank you again, my friend.
Thank you, Mike.
Tom Korski, managing editor. I don't really mean that. I love to read, but sometimes what I read, imagine that the year before the fire preparedness budget slashed by 23%. It's called fire preparedness for a reason. Tom Korski, managing editor at blacklocks.ca, joins us every Wednesday morning at 10 as we mind Ottawa's business here on the Mike Farwell Show.